Bianca Belair, Jade Cargill, Jordynne Grace, Syuri, Thunder Rosa, Becky Lynch, Mandy Rose, who is 2022's greatest women's wrestler.
Welcome everyone to Ring the Bell, this is DS, and today we're going to talk about who is the greatest women's wrestler right now with a very special guest, Editor-in-Chief of PWI, Kevin McElvaney. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So today we're going to talk about Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Women's Wrestling 150 list, which just came out last week. The social media is talking.
So I've heard and so I've seen. The idea, I just will say up front, is never to upset or provoke with this. That's not our game, and especially with the women's 150 issue, because I think it's too important, because women's wrestling has had a hard enough time over the years, and we certainly don't need to instigate fights on purpose.
I mean, it's great because everyone was talking about women's wrestling, a lot of talk about Stardom, which we'll get into, but today with you, we're going to go through the top 10 list, and we're going to talk about some stuff outside of 10 list, because certain NXT Women's Champions very upset about it. Before jumping into our top 10 list, I want to talk about the criteria for this Women's 150. I believe the evaluation period is October 1st, 2021 to September 15, 2022. It's right after WWE Extreme Rules match when Charlotte torn apart Lily, and then Sasha Banks returned to attack Bianca and Becky Lynch, and Britt Baker was AEW champion at this point, and we also just got Bound for Glory 2021 when Mickie James defeated Deonna to become the Knockouts champion. 2, September 15 is right after WWE Clash of Castle, so Damage Control is now in WWE, Liv Morgan defeating Shayna Baszler. This is right before Impact Bound for Glory, so Mickie James versus Mia Yim, that is not in this evaluation period. So what are the criteria?
The in-ring achievement, so that's wins and losses, championships, especially like the really high-level championships. Mostly we look at singles competition for these purposes because we have a separate tag team ranking that'll be out in the next issue. We look at influence, so that's both within the promotion where he wrestles, and again, influence can expand beyond wrestling. It can be mainstream influence. Sasha Banks and Naomi, they're doing so much outside of wrestling right now, and certainly they're not the only examples of that. Technical ability is the next one. People kind of ask what that means, and it is very subjective. The moves they're executing, the stories they're telling, minimum activity requirements of 10 matches during that 12 months. So that's why, for example, Bayley is not on the list. Now, there is another way to qualify if you don't have 10 full matches, because some promotions don't run shows as often, things like that. 6 months where you have at least one match. But activity can also be a positive, apart from helping you make the list. Like if you're out there wrestling a whole lot, that's taken as a credit to you, and it figures into your overall score. Breadth and quality of competition. So quality is you're facing top tier opponents who are available to you, whether that's in your division or say if you're a freelancer or independent, just going around facing the best out there. If you're facing the same one or two people the entire period, that can potentially work against you, even if they're very high level.
So those are the criteria, so do not come here and be like, why is Lita not on this list? She had one match, and now you know the criteria. So let's start with the top 10. It is Taya Valkyrie of AAA/Impact Wrestling. So Taya started out this evaluation period as being released from NXT. She made her AAA return. She also made her return to Impact Wrestling in April.
It's a huge return to form for her. We had an article, not to plug the magazine too much, but we had an article on her in the magazine a few months ago, and she referred to the Frankie Monet period as a bad haircut. I think that's a little harsh. I enjoyed her time as Frankie Monet, but the truth was she wasn't given a lot of time. So once she was released from WWE and she had that mandatory period where she couldn't wrestle, she just came back and was on fire. AAA, she won the Reina de Reinas championship, one of the top championships in Mexico, and this was her 4th time holding that championship, tying a record that Fabi Apache set a few years back. In addition, the inaugural MLW featherweight women's division champion, tag team champion in Impact. Really just a great year. And I mean, just miscellaneous, she won some other independent titles. She won a championship in Australia. I'm happy that she's getting back and feeling herself again.
So this is a Stardom domination this year, but number 9 we got Stardom's Starlight Kid. I gotta watch more Stardom, but I've watched a couple of Starlight Kid's matches. What a delight. She's a luchadora.
She's awesome. She's really kind of like the wunderkind, like just getting out there. I think she's 20. She's very young, but has 4 or 5 years of experience, because I was going to say in Japan, but honestly, it's the case in Mexico and Europe and a lot of other places outside of the U.S. Wrestlers will start training very young, and there's good and bad about that. She held multiple championships during the period. A couple of them were tag team championships. One was a trios title. One was the Goddesses of Stardom. The Goddesses of Stardom title is their tag team championship, and then the Artist of Stardom title is their trios title. But she held, notably, the High Speed Championship. There's not an exact comparison for what that is, but what the closest thing I would say is like the X Division title. Like, there's not weight limits or anything like that, but it's just meant to go out there and wrestle a very intense high-speed title. So she did great with that. She went bad this year. She had the darker colors, and like you said, she has this awesome presence, luchadora quality, has the cool mask.
So what would you say is Starlight Kid's kind of must-watch match in this period?
Starlight Kid, Azumi match for the high-speed title. I don't know the date offhand, but if you Google that match, you should be able to go and watch it for free. You might have to skip ahead a little bit. It's not going to be right at the beginning of the video. There's a little bit of extra work with some of this, which I understand can be challenging, especially. It is worth going out of your way.
For you WWE fans who's missing, ahoy, Kairi. She had a match with Kairi at the World Climax 2022, which was in March, and I think that was a really fun match too. So check them out. Let's go to number 8. It is Charlotte Flair. She had a great year. She entered Royal Rumble as a champion. She had a WrestleMania 38 match against Ronda Rousey, defeating Ronda Rousey. And then she also had a huge match against Becky Lynch, which had entire internet talking with the belt swapping situation, and then a great Survivor Series match. But somewhat controversial pick for number 8, because she's been out of action since May.
Yeah, so I get why people see that, especially if they don't know all about what we do in the evaluation period, and we can't expect everyone to know that. They just see a list floating around, and we do try to get better at educating people. So you look at May, and this began in October. My math is not a strong subject for me, but that's still a good half of the evaluation period. And during that time, she was a main eventer, a world champion, as you said, on multiple brands. Despite that whole, the belt swap thing was weird, but technically she was a champion on both brands. She has the most title reigns of any woman in WWE. There's a reason that they keep coming back to her and putting her in those main event spots, because she's the queen. Even with that missed time, she just had such a strong first half of the year that we felt as a group that she belonged in the top 10.
Number 7 is Saya Kamitani. Tell me a little bit about Saya.
She holds the Wonder of Stardom Championship, which is colloquially known as the White Belt. I like to compare it to the Intercontinental Championship. Depending on the time period, the Intercontinental Championship is presented as either a really big deal or kind of an afterthought. This is not an afterthought title. She'll main event shows with this championship. She's been wrestling, I think, 3 years, just very early in her career. She does her finishing maneuver is the Phoenix Splash, which is also Kota Ibushi's finisher. It's good enough that Kota Ibushi said, like, wow, okay, this is really good. You got my attention. She's just this great high flyer, sympathetic, good, like fan favorite type character. Consensus is that it's just a matter of time before she goes and wins the major championship there, which is the World of Stardom title.
What would you say is a must-watch match of Saya?
Saya Kamitani and Natsupoi, and that was a Wonder of Stardom title defense. But she also had a really great match last year at the Dream Queendom, which is like the big end of the year event for Stardom. She had a fantastic match with Tam Nakano, which is where she won the championship. So that's also well worth seeking out. Really, you can't go wrong anything from her over the last 12 months.
Now, number 6 spot is Impact Wrestling's Jordynne Grace. She had an incredible year. So October of 2021, she won the inaugural Digital Media Championship. Since then, she challenged X Division Championship, Impact World Tag Team Championship, and in June, she won Knockouts Championship in the first ever Queen of the Mountain match, which was historical, which was a great, huge match. She also had an incredible match in Chicago against Mia Yim, and she is first Knockouts Triple Crown winner.
I appreciate that you shouted out that match specifically with Mia Yim. That was one of my favorite matches of the last however many months. Just excellent. Yeah, Jordynne has just kind of kept on reinventing herself. She's gotten heavily into competitive bodybuilding. She has, changed her persona a little bit. She gets in there and just really goes for it. She faces anybody. She has challenged, I think, for every championship in Impact except the Impact World Championship. I think every other title she's at least competed for it. Just a lot of great matches all year. We mentioned that match with outside of the evaluation period, but the Masha Slamovich match that was terrific. I mean, this is the best year of her career so far. I'm excited to see how she continues on with this reign.
Number 5 on the list is AEW's That Bitch, Jade Cargill, forever TBS champion. Well, Nyla Rose has it now, but people always say she's very green. What do you say about that?
She embraced the term green and says green like money. She dyed her hair green. Yeah, there's no doubt that she still has some work to do in the ring, and I say that as someone who could not do a quarter of what she's already done. Yeah, her best years are ahead of her. She's still very young in the industry, but she's an undefeated rookie, and she had some big wins during the evaluation period. She was the inaugural TBS champion and again continued to reign as champion. And she just has that unquestionable star quality that even though she wasn't the top champion in AEW, it's a secondary title technically, she was kind of positioned for large parts of the year as the face of that division. We knew that when we put her in that spot, people were going to say, well, like, is she ready for number 5 yet? But I think, just the way she has been a star on that show says she is. And the fact that she's at number 5 already, she's going to continue to improve her craft in the ring, which I should add, like over the last 12 months, she has shown significant improvement.
She's adding amazing moves to her arsenal, and she had a really good year. She won the TBS Championship tournament. She just drips stardom everywhere she goes. Yeah, face of AEW. Tony Khan loves Jade Cargill, and obviously everyone that's like watching her on TV needs to stop, because everyone's like, who is this real-life She-Hulk? This is a real-life superhero, so Jade Cargill, the future is bright. Let's go to number 4. It is big time Becky Lynch in WWE. She had one of my favorite championship reign ever because she got to defend her title against so many different people, and she was able to kind of change up her character for every single person, to Lita, to Doudrop, to Bianca Belair, to Liv Morgan. She brought something different to every feud, so I really enjoyed her reign. Also, the fashion was on point.
Yeah, she's another one that's just been great at reinventing herself, and I think she sort of hinted at that she kind of was fighting an uphill battle. She wouldn't have necessarily picked to come back and be like this antagonist because fans loved her. I think she went for it, and like once that was the plan, it's like, okay, all right, we're going to do this. And I think certainly the way she came back, and it was during the last evaluation period, but it was the way she came back and just kind of stampeded over Bianca. I think a lot of us weren't super happy about that, but she parlayed that into something positive because she was this top heel on Raw, and she, as you mentioned, wrestled against anyone that would come at her, making Bianca top of the mountain once again. The majority of people saying like, yeah, she could have also been number 1. She could have been number 2, number 3. Like, she could have been higher than this. Yeah, you're not going to ever find me talking anything bad about Becky Lynch. She's fantastic.
I think that she could have been higher on the list, definitely, because I think she had an incredible year. Very rare long-term storyline pushed Bianca to the meteoric stardom, and she did that for other people too. She did that for Liv Morgan. It didn't work the best for Doudrop. Got everyone talking about that Charlotte Flair match, and Lita, a lot of fans' favorite Lita match of her career. So absolutely amazing. Let's go to number 3, AEW's Thunder Rosa. So March of 2022, she won the AEW Women's Championship in the steel cage match. It was a brutal steel cage match, and since then she defeated Nyla Rose, Serena Deeb, Toni Storm, and then even Miyu Yamashita. Even still, people are quite not happy about how high she was in this list.
Do you think that's more because she hasn't been wrestling for a while now, because she kind of disappeared suddenly, or do they think that, she's just not the top person in that division?
I gotta preface this by saying I'm a big Thunder Rosa fan. I really like her. I told this to Tony Khan myself. She won this title in a very, very exciting way. A lot of fans were so behind her. But since then, starting from that Vicky Guerrero segment, go back to Mexico or something, it's been downhill since then. And honestly, and this is not her fault at all, but the booking has been extremely weak, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. That's where you could make an argument that she could be lower. When we look at the in-ring side of things, it's solid. And she had those defenses, like just rock solid defenses. She was out at the end of the period, but it was just the end of the period. It was one month. Up to the championship, she was, very much in the mix. But she has not been presented very strongly as a champion, and I found that's been a weakness of AEW, which is a shame. Yeah, there were some things working against her, but all in all, she did a great job with what she had. And outside of AEW. She was a little bit less active in the ring this year, but she was still this hugely influential figure with Mission Pro Wrestling, her promotion. This is all subjective. We have criteria, but we're human beings making choices, and you could argue she could be lower, but I feel good about her position for the reasons that I just mentioned.
She's obviously very influential with bringing up newer talent, growing that next generation of women's wrestling with the Mission Pro Wrestling. That's big thing that she's doing to the industry. She's also one of those few women that really uses her influence for good. The Uvalde shooting, she's been a big proponent in helping out the families, and outside of that, she just does a lot of great work, and she uses her influence for good, which I think is a very important aspect. Shall we go to top 2? This is where things get really, really competitive. This woman topped the list last year, and this time she's on the top 2. Bianca Belair, the EST, is not EST on this list because she's number 2. She's a Raw Women's Champion. She had an absolutely amazing WrestleMania match against Becky Lynch, Survivor Series Sole Survivor, and huge win against Becky Lynch at SummerSlam, kind of bookending that great, great feud.
So I completely understand the perspective that she should have been number 1. Internally, we debated it a lot. We're a committee. Not everybody agreed with the choice. She had a fantastic year. In explaining our number 1 spot, I'm going to have to probably also explain why she's number 2 and not number 1. And this is where I hate doing this, because it's not a knock on her abilities, her as a person, anything like that. The reason Becky Lynch is able to be number 4 is because the first half of that evaluation period, Becky Lynch was big time Bex.
Because Bianca had that storyline where she was in the back of the line and she was building back up.
And it was very gradual. And the way our evaluation period lines up, she was ramping up to that. Now, the Elimination Chamber onward, just unstoppable. If that was her whole year, as much as I feel there are very good reasons for our number 1 being number 1, yeah, I think she's 2 years in a row. I think it's an easy call. But in storyline, the way she was booked, which is a lot of what these lists are, and we have to quantify it a little bit, not just say who's the best. It's who's the best that year. We have to do that some way. Otherwise, arguably it'll be the same list every year, or it'll just be a slightly different list every year. Why even do it every year if it's not about what someone did during the 12 months, right? That's why she's in the number 2 spot, which is not a knock on her. The number 2 spot means she's still number 2 and there's a case for her being number 1. But that's why, that first half of the year. And then, I guess one other thing to mention, the big story of her year was beating Becky Lynch again, which is awesome, but it was a lot of facing the same, even though it's the highest level of competition, because it was a lot of Becky Lynch, a lot of the same opponents, and that first half of the year. Other than that, her year is just completely pristine, and she's an easy number 1. So anyone who thinks she's number 1, I hear you.
We have to talk about number 1 now. The champion of this list, the EST of the list. The number 1 goes to STARDOM's Syuri. Syuri was on last year's list too. I think she was number 7, right? Yeah, tell me about Syuri. How did she get to top the list this year?
Yeah, so Syuri has been the star of Stardom. She's been the World of Stardom champion which is their world title, since the Wrestle Dream Queendom show at the end of December last year. Prior to that, she won their 5-star Grand Prix tournament. She was defending, in the same way that people will defend the Money in the Bank briefcase before they cash it in. She was defending that title shot along with her SWA Undisputed Championship, which is another secondary title that Stardom has. Syuri had that title until she won the big title and then said, you know what, I'm going to relinquish this. Someone else can have this championship. She also had the Goddesses of Stardom tag title. They did lose that. She's still part of the team, but it was her partner Julia who was pinned. Syuri was not beaten. And then she had this world title and she's been defending the hell out of it. People from the Stardom roster, people who were outsiders who were coming in from different companies. Nene Takahashi, who's a legend of Joshi Pro Wrestling in Japan, came and challenged her, one of the early faces of Stardom as well. Syuri's just having these incredible matches. She has this awesome, like a Shayna Baszler, she has this legit MMA background.
Hard-hitting, super hard-hitting. The chops and kicks are very scary. What makes this year her year, though?
Good question. So the next part of that is Stardom has continued to gain momentum in the way that New Japan was doing 4, 5, 6 years ago. During the pandemic specifically, 2019, Stardom was, in terms of live attendance, the number 6 promotion in Japan. Mm-hmm. Now, and especially under Syuri's championship, where she's the face of the company, it is the number 2 promotion behind only New Japan, which has been around for 50 years. They are drawing huge crowds in arenas that are not even, it's still limited attendance and it's still social distancing in some cases. And she's still drawing out, like thousands of people to these shows, and a credit to the whole roster, but she has been the person on top and they've been positively thriving. She's just been on fire and has the respect of her peers. That's the influence on the sport side of it. Everybody wants to face her. Anyone who can publicly say, if they're not under contract, that would make it a bad idea to say it, will say that they want to face her. They want to get in there. And
I think it also probably must have been a big decision on Pro Wrestling Illustrated's part too, to give number one spot to Stardom, because I guess most of your audience is North American wrestling fandom. How did that decision to give Stardom this top spot? I mean, people are saying Stardom's too niche, the audience is not big enough. What's your comment on that?
We debate these things. We're not using the word niche necessarily, but we debate those things on some level. We did the same thing when, Kazuchika Okada and Kenny Omega were the number one in the PWI 500, where New Japan was starting to really be this big international commodity again. We look at what Stardom is doing as something that's really advancing the art form, and even if it's not in front of as many eyes as WWE, it is changing things. And I mean, you need to look no further than, and this is from when the company was smaller, you have Kairi Sane, who came over to WWE. You have Io Shirai, who is former World of Stardom champion. You have Tony Storm and Jamie Hayter, who were international wrestlers who just were dying to compete over there. To suggest that it's obscure is just not correct, because we're looking at, this is the number 2 pro wrestling company in Japan. How can it be niche if it's the number 2 promotion there? And then also, unquestionably, the number 1 women's promotion, because everything else is kind of on the independent level. And I'm not saying it's better than whatever, you can debate all that. But in terms of promotions that are just doing women's wrestling, yeah, it's far and away. It's the most influential. It's making the most money.
This got, conversation going. People are like, who is Syuri? Maybe some diminutive way, but some are actually really just curious. Who is Syuri?
And I love it. That's my favorite thing.
Right now, I think because, there's some accessibility issue to North American fans where it's language. There's also, you have to subscribe. This is a good cycle because as we're giving more eyes to these amazing talents, they might make it more accessible to us. So I think this is great. There's amazing conversation happening about Stardom talents, and I've just watched a couple matches and my mind is blown.
It is overwhelming. There are a lot of primers out there that you can follow, because it's a lot to jump into it. But a lot of people have tried to make that a little bit easier. Karen Peterson, one of our writers, has done a lot of work for post-wrestling in particular to that end. Karen watches wrestling, a different Karen, on YouTube, does a lot of great primer videos, Church of Joshi. So just shout outs to women journalists and content creators out there who are helping to make this a little more accessible.
That was our top 10 list. But before we wrap up, we have to talk about certain champion who is very upset. She tweeted out, robbed, because Mandy Rose, NXT Women's Champion, is upset that she's number 21.
Oh, man. I did not see that tweet. Look, I get it. And I've intentionally kept that stuff up because I'm not going to to me, it's always explaining why somebody's lower. That's I had to do it with Bianca here. But I'm not one to say oh, this person does this at this level or whatever. But for the purpose of explaining, Mandy found herself in a really tough position with NXT being kind of downgraded. Let's be honest. It was returned to this developmental. It was a rebrand, but WWE in its own terms called it developmental again. They made it clear it was meant to build up new stars. Mandy, as a veteran of a few years now, was brought in to help with that and crushed it. So it's not a knock on her as far as I'm concerned to be 21. For comparison, Braun Breaker, male equivalent, I guess, for lack of a better word, although of course less experienced, on NXT, found himself somewhere in the 30s for the PWI 500 ranking, whereas NXT wrestlers, as recently as 2 years ago, Adam Cole was number 2, because it was being presented as this third brand. So it's not a knock on her. It's not even a knock on NXT. It's just how WWE treats it, because we talk about the influence. Well, if it's developmental again, then yeah, what you're doing is not. It's not to say it's not as good. It's not as worth doing if you're not as good even. But it's not the major title anymore, and it's not being presented like that. I think there are arguments that she did what she could to make it presented that way.
I love NXT 2.0. I loved what it did to women's division, but you're right. I think WWE definitely did stop treating it like a third brand. They used to do that for a little bit, but they definitely dropped it. So I see the argument. I think it's WWE's fault. I see the argument. I will let Mandy know about that because she is upset.
No, I just they've done great, and I think the women's division has been the best part of NXT 2.0, and I think there's a lot of great rookies coming up. Again, not to leave people out, but like you have Roxanne Perez and Cora Jade. They're not rookies, but like a Tiffany Stratton, she's taken just to wrestling like a duck to water. I mean, and Mandy's doing great, and Toxic Attraction is one of the big features of that show. So it's the highest ranking of her career by far. You know, we considered her for the top 20. You could make, I think with our criteria, it's hard to justify putting her in the top 10. Reasonable people can disagree, and you're not wrong if you believe that. It's just we're different people making different decisions.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining in for this lengthy discussion. And I just gotta say, props to you and the whole PWI team. I mean, so much effort and so much research to put this 150 list. This is really difficult because you guys probably realize that I never do top wrestler list ever. Or even for my end of the year awards, I make a fan vote because I cannot decide. There's so many people, so many things to consider. So, like, huge props to your team for coming up with this amazing list. And this is a great resource for women's wrestling fans to look and see, like, who should they be looking at. And also, if fans are not happy about it, I believe there's a fan submission, right?
Yeah, so in the Women's 150 issue, there is an official fan ballot for the year-end PWI awards. That's legit. It's completely fan voted. It's a write-in. So, like, we have the ballot on there, and there are people listed on the short list and be like, why isn't so-and-so on here? Write them in. Like, they have that vote counts every bit as much as the people who are on our short list. Like, we want to hear from you. We want, our readers to make their voices heard, and then we can celebrate some more people at the end of the year and, to get some nice shiny plaques out there to them, hopefully.
Yeah, so there's definitely a way for your voice to be heard. So where can we get this amazing issue?
Yeah, so right now the best way to get it is to go to pwi-online.com. The links are also on the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook pages as well. We're at official PWI on Twitter and Instagram specifically. You can pre-order the print edition if you want the print magazine. I grew up reading PWI and other, WWF magazine and so many others. If you want to do that, you can do that. But if you think like, oh, I don't need a magazine, there's the digital edition. You can grab that. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Kevin, where can everyone find you online?
So that I can hear from the Mandy Rose fans.
It might be a lot of love.
I love hearing from everybody as long as we're feeling civil about it. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram at McElvaney, so WACK, and then the rest of my last name, which should hopefully be on screen. Yeah, I like hearing from people. I'm generally happy to answer questions. Sometimes we're a little busy with the magazine, so I don't always get back right away, but would love to hear from you all.
Yeah. And you can find me at DSShin on Instagram and RingWLDS on Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!